Hey guys, it's Friday. Are you ready? Get your game on. Come on, let's go. Friday, March 26th. Welcome to the Block Thrasher Daily Morning Crypto Update, where we are shattering the complexities of crypto with news, commentary, analysis, and education. Listen, yesterday I created a really great podcast. I recorded for probably an hour and a half. Got deep into subjects that are super important and really crucial that I get passionate about. And I didn't have the record button on. I messed up. And so today we're going to do it over again. We're going to cover all of that, including a couple of things for today. It's going to be good. Sit tight. We're going to be talking about something that is of huge importance. Now, you probably heard somebody say at some point in your life, or maybe even you said it yourself, hey, we live in a free country. But is that true? Do we actually live in a free country? We're going to talk about some things regarding that. Did you know that at a point in time in our history, the Supreme Court declared that the U.S. government, the Congress, has plenary powers to control the monetary supply? That's our word of the day. The word of the day is plenary. It means full. It means complete. It means entire. It means absolute, unqualified power, absolute power to determine what money is and to control the money supply. We're going to get into that. We're going to get into that deep. And we're going to see that we're not actually as free as we think we are. And there's one incident in history that is 90 something years ago, approximately, maybe it's 80, whatever it is, close, 80, 90 years ago, that illustrates this. All right, let's just look at the market really quickly and see what's happening with prices today. The total market cap is up 1.91%. It's at $1.67 trillion. Bitcoin really not moving at all. Currently at $53,167. Ethereum also stagnant. $1,629.71. Both Bitcoin and Ethereum are down close to 10% on the week. Cardano turning it around overnight in the last 24 hours, up almost 10% to $1.23, which brings it to almost having no change for the week. It's slightly down 1%. Why is Cardano pumping today? Well, this could be because I'm not. I really don't know, but one thing that did happen was Cardano released its monthly podcast show called Cardano 360 yesterday. And man, was it, I listened to the whole thing. It was incredible. There was over 19,000 people tuned in to that show. It was unbelievable. And they talked about the coming smart contract. They talked about, that smart contracts are coming, I should say, not the coming. That smart contracts are coming soon. They talked about some of the things that are being done in the background to allow, just without getting into the deep details of it, just to summarize it, they're creating a system in which any developer that works on legacy systems with coding languages that they already know, C#, C++, .NET, list goes on, are going to be able to easily throw that code that they write, that they already know, that they're familiar with, into an interpreter that will spin that up into Plutus, which is the Haskell-driven version of smart contract coding language for Cardano, which has a high level of certainty with rigorous testing and proofs. They're going to make the smart contracts that are developed on the Cardano platform significantly more secure than the smart contracts that are currently written on the EVM with Ethereum and with the Solidity programming language. Just a whole bunch of stuff there. And so I'm thinking that this pump could be there's more that I could go. There was so much revealed that I think would get a lot of people excited and just be like, holy crap. Cardano is going to just going to kill it. I mean, they just the forethought and the planning and everything that's put into it. And then they brought in all these partners from around the world, developers that are excited, who are talking about why they're choosing to develop on Cardano. And it largely has to do with the fact that these are companies that develop high level applications that require rigorous testing to be certain that they're going to work. We're talking about, like, if you're making software that flies a plane, or if you're making software that runs a bank, or these types of things. And so when they hear that Haskell's been adopted, and they hear about the peer review process that's gone on with Cardano and all the work that's been done, the assurances to make sure that the thing works right when it's launched and is more secure, and they just already have an affinity to that because that's how they run their current development process. And so then they hear there's a cryptocurrency that's doing it, a lot of excitement. So good stuff. So Cardano's pumping up 9.36% to $1.23. Binance Coin is up slightly, 1.81%. It is $251.44. Polkadot up 3%, $31.96. XRP bouncing up 10%. It is now 56 cents. Uniswap up 3%, $28.41. Litecoin up 2%, $181. Chainlink up 2%, $26.28. Terra Luna is up 11%, $18.64. It's an outlier. And Tron up 15%. EOS is up 10%. Man, EOS has really fallen though, hasn't it? Number 26 now in terms of market cap. Even Monero is up a bit. Solana up 5%. I think that will cover it for the day. As you can see, there's a number of altcoins that are turning around and now are in the green territory, while Bitcoin and Ethereum, number 1 and 2, continue to struggle this morning. All right. Back to the word of the day, plenary. Plenary, just in case you didn't get it earlier. It is full, complete, entire, absolute, unqualified. It also means that when there's a meeting, such as a session of Congress, when you hear them say it's a plenary session, it means that it is attended by all qualified members, so fully constituted. So whatever the number is that needs to be there to have a plenary session. A plenary session, a meeting, or the like. Plenary. It's used quite frequently within legal discussions, and will be used in some of the things that we look at today, and that's why I wanted to bring it to your attention. Now, if you listened to the podcast a couple of days ago, not yesterday, obviously, since I messed up, I think it was the day before, which would make it the 24th. I talked quite a bit about the Bank of International Settlements, which, if you didn't catch that show, is basically the central bank to the central banks. And their whole objective is to bring together and to collude. It's a cabal, ladies and gentlemen. It's a cabal where they get together and they collude on what we're going to do to maintain the monetary system which currently exists, the global monetary system that is run by these central banks, which obviously wield enormous influence and power. You think the federal government of the United States has incredible power, the president of the United States? Where is that power derived from? Well, there's military power, there's military might, there is that. Other than that, it's the economic power. Where is the economic power? What is it controlled by? The central bank, the Federal Reserve. It is the entity which issues our currency and controls inflation, controls interest rates, and so much more. It's a regulatory entity that determines what banks can do, what banks can't do, things like this, right? So, more news today coming out of the Bank of International Settlements to illustrate what I've been talking about. The central banks and the Bank of International Settlements have published their first central bank digital currency known as CBDC. You've probably been hearing about it. Report laying out key requirements. Bitcoin and cryptocurrency has gained so much traction, obviously capturing a fairly significant amount of wealth with at times approaching $2 trillion in terms of total market cap. Now that it's got the attention. Now, is that the impetus for why they're talking about CBDCs? I doubt it, actually. They've probably been thinking about this for quite some time and just waiting for the environment to be right, for the technological progress to be right, for there to be a way to make a digital currency. So the 7 central banks and the Bank of Internationalists released this report assessing the feasibility of publicly available CBDCs in helping central banks deliver their public policy objectives. The report outlines foundational principles and core features of a CBDC, but does not give an opinion on whether to issue a CBDC. Central banks continue investigating CBDC feasibility without committing to issuance. So a group of 7 central banks, together with the Bank of International Settlements, yesterday, the 25th, published a report identifying the foundational principles necessary for any publicly available CBDC to help central banks meet their public policy objectives. Public policy objectives, aka inflation, devaluing of the currency over time, transferring wealth to the elites from the laborers, from the hard work of the lower people, a debt-based, debt-driven fiat that they purport to be able to create stability with, to prevent instability. However, what has happened ever since the creation of the Federal Reserve banks, or of the central banks, I should say? Booms and busts, booms and busts, booms and busts, booms and busts. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913. The Great Depression happened in the 1930s, right? Failed. Of course, they'd probably argue, well, we were on the gold standard and this is why that happened. And that's why we had to go completely fiat, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to get into that stuff a little bit later. But the report is called Central Bank Digital Currencies, Foundational Principles and Core Features. It was compiled by, let's see, who are these central banks? Bank of Canada, Bank of England, Bank of Japan, European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, Sveriges Riksbank, the Swiss National Bank, and the Bank of International Settlement. You want to know where the real power in the world lies? I'm sorry, so many people get caught up in politics. Democrat, Republican, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, blah, 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 blah. Sure, they have a measure of power. They can do harm, or they can do good. But ultimately, the real power, the power to create money, I'm not going to say wealth, and it's even hard for me to say money, the power to control economies and nation states lies with this group. The Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, Sveriges Riksbank, the Swiss National Bank, and the Bank of International Settlements. The federal government, the United States, has a level of dependency upon currently in the current structure, the Federal Reserve. Now, to what extent can the president wield influence? Can the Congress wield influence over the Federal Reserve and the actions that it takes? And even over the Bank of International Settlements, this international entity, which brings these banks together to collude, to, depends on your outlook, I guess, we could say conspire to maintain power, to maintain control. It's no secret. It's out in the open. They're telling us what they're doing. So what are the key principles for the CBDCs that they've outlined? Number 1 is coexistence with cash and other types of money in a flexible and innovative payment system. Okay, that sounds good. But like with everything, like we're going to see later today when we talk about what happened with gold in 1933, the way these things are done is they're always done under some sort of crisis. They're always done with some sort of promises that, hey, look, we're not really changing things that much. You're still going to be able to use cash. You're still going to be able to use other types of money. We're just creating the CBDCs, sort of rolling it out, to test things out to see, because it's going to be more efficient in their ability to just create money and to deliver stimulus checks, et cetera, and to require everybody to have a CBDC central bank account and to track every transaction that ever happens. And it's interesting the way this works now. Currently in our system, the way money is created is when banks loan money. That's how money gets created. There's different ways that money gets put into the money supply, into the M2 money supply and M3, M1, whatever, all the different money supplies. If you want to learn more about that, follow some of the macroeconomic guys and dive deeper into it. But essentially what happens is when loans are created, new money is created, and that expands the monetary supply, the money supply. And this would be super hyperinflationary, except for the fact that when downturns occur, when there's recessions, a lot of businesses fail, a lot of people fail, they go bankrupt. Those loans never get repaid. They just get slashed. They just get written off. And so that decreases the total money supply, you see? But if you cut out the banks, and that's what happens with the CBDC, and if I was banks, if I was JP Morgan Chase or any of the other large, massively huge banks, CBDCs would concern me because the central bank could just cut them out. Boop, gone, delete, no need, goodbye. Or they let them continue to function and let them do loans on things like this. But if the central bank has the ability to stimulate the economy, just put money into people's accounts, this is highly inflationary. And the problem there then becomes, does the current administration, do they utilize that in order to get votes? Do they mismanage it? And do they create some hyperinflationary environment? It's all interesting. So this is probably something they're also thinking about. Their second principle is that any introduction should support wider policy objectives and do no harm to monetary and financial stability. Features should promote innovation and efficiency. Some of this stuff, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, obvious. The group of central banks will continue to work together on CBDCs without prejudging any decision on whether or not to introduce CBDCs in their jurisdictions. All right, let's move on. Enough of that. Michael Saylor. It seems like Michael Saylor is in the cryptocurrency news every single day. And I don't mind that because, as I've said before, he's one of the most articulate advocates of Bitcoin. He says that Bitcoin is a screaming buy and predicts that the top crypto could hit $5 million. MicroStrategy CEO Michael Saylor believes a seven-digit price tag is in Bitcoin's future. Now, he didn't actually say, that he thinks it's going to. He didn't make a prediction. When you read what he actually said of 5 million, now here it is. Here's his quote. He says, "I can see Bitcoin going to 1 million. I could see it going to 5 million. Because if it simply replaces all the indexes as a monetary index money, why shouldn't it go to 100 trillion in market cap or something?" And that's what I like about Saylor. He's always got some fundamental analysis type of reason why he's saying what he's saying. He's not just throwing out $1 million or $5 million on some sort of speculative whim because of sentiment. He's looking at the amount of money that is currently held in indexes, and we'll even talk about the reasons why some of the companies and corporations that hold their resources in those indexes might put it into Bitcoin, and that's where he comes up with some of these numbers. He says, "In my life, I've never seen something that was such a screaming signal. You've got a 200 to 300 trillion addressable market. You've got a problem. Money is not sound. You've got engineered, thermodynamically sound money, Bitcoin. You've got a dominant network." He's talking about Bitcoin. Everybody's decided it's the network. It's exploding. The signal that is exploding is it's growing 200% a year for 12 years running. That's the signal. And that will cover our positive news of the day. If you're looking to get pumped up and excited about what can happen with crypto and where it can go, you can always find Michael Saylor out there bringing some good mojo. Oh, other good news. This was from yesterday. Fidelity and Goldman Sachs filed for Bitcoin ETFs with the SEC. Both Fidelity and Goldman Sachs have filed applications with the SEC for ETFs. This would be a major step forward for the market, increasing accessibility. Other countries like Canada already have approved ETFs, signaling growing popularity. So some of what we're going to be talking about today is this issue of, will the federal government at some point try to quell Bitcoin? Obviously, regulatory concerns such as that have been an issue since the beginning and something that people worry about. Probably the primary driver of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, of FUD. When we see things like this story that Fidelity and Goldman Sachs are trying to file for Bitcoin ETFs, and we've seen the futures markets open up on the COMEX, and the CBOE is now talking about trying to do some things with crypto. We have all these other institutionals coming in and investing in major corporations, Tesla, PayPal, the list goes on. Visa and MasterCard even now. Goes on and on and on. Well, this is like a double-edged sword. It's good because it starts to sweep away somewhat that concern of crypto being regulated away, especially in terms of like an outright ban or making it illegal. But that is the question we're going to ask today. And it is possible. So the double-edged sword is that these entities wield influence. They have power, wealth. They're closely attached, maybe even in bed with the regulatory agencies and the senators and the congressmen and the people that have power, regulatory power. And so it's good. It lessens the concern for some sort of draconian regulation. But at the same time, the reason it's a double-edged sword is on the flip side. They can take steps to make it more difficult for regular people to partake and to play in the crypto space. They could do this a number of ways. If I was them and I was trying to do that, I'd make it such that only accredited investors could own crypto for the public's protection. It's always going to be something that sounds really positive, right? Altruistic. Like we don't want the public to get hurt, and it's so volatile. It's so new. So you have to be an accredited investor. That would be one. Number two would be, you can have crypto, sure, but you have to buy, sell, transfer, store it with a registered, accredited, approved entity like Goldman Sachs, let's just say. So there's things that can be done. It's kind of like not outlawing guns, but taxing ammunition 1,000% or something, so that it's so expensive that only the wealthiest people would be able to buy it. Strategies that can be taken like that. So moving on to this question, and this is what today's episode was, what yesterday's episode was about, which I never got out. And this is going to be the primary subject matter of this today. And we're going to launch this off by looking at something that Ray Dalio said. Ray Dalio said Bitcoin is, quote, very likely to be an outcast. What's he talking about? During a recent interview with Andy Serwer, hedge fund mogul and billionaire investor Ray Dalio reiterated his predictions about a possible ban, quote, ban on Bitcoin. According to Dalio, there's a good probability that Bitcoin will be an outcast, like when U.S. authorities delegitimized the ownership of private gold. Talking about his upcoming book, he said, I think it would be very likely that you will have Bitcoin under certain circumstances, outlawed the way gold was outlawed. What? What's he talking about? Now, I know there's probably going to be some of you in the audience who are aware of what he's talking about, but I think most Americans have no idea, no clue what he's talking about. Did you know U.S. authorities delegitimized the ownership of private gold? Delegitimize is not the right word. They made it illegal, is what happened. When and how did this happen? This is from Investopedia.com. We're just going to use it to kind of cover some of the basics of this. It happened in the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. What is the Gold Reserve Act of 1934? The term Gold Reserve Act of 1934 refers to a law that took away the title, the ownership of all gold and gold certificates held by private individuals and institutions, and did what? It transferred it to the United States Treasury. That's right. That means if you held gold in 1932, if you had $1 million worth of gold, it was stolen. Okay, someone's going to say, wait a second, it wasn't stolen. Because they gave them fair market value for the gold. Is that true? Let's look at it. The act, which also included gold held by the Federal Reserve, was signed into law by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. One of the most popular, beloved presidents of our time, the only president, I believe, that served 3 terms, stacked the courts, set into place so much of what we see today in terms of the explosive expansion and growth of the government, all kinds of social programs, welfare programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In my view, did more harm than any other president we've ever seen in recent times. But this isn't about politics. This is about crypto and money and economics. And this act of 1934, signed into law by President Roosevelt, said that financial institutions and the Federal Reserve could no longer exchange U.S. dollars for gold. Key takeaways. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 was passed under President Franklin D. Roosevelt at the height of the Great Depression to stabilize, quote, stabilize the money supply. See, this is how it works. I'm sure there's people, from formerly communist countries cringing at this because they lived it, they've seen it. It's always under crisis, under duress. The money supply is not stable. We need to stabilize it. Give us your gold. Gold reserves were transferred from the Federal Reserve Bank to the U.S. Treasury at a discount. The precious metal was effectively converted from a currency to a commodity with the passage of the act. The intended effect of the law was to increase the money supply. Sound familiar? And stem deflation by devaluing the dollar, including in foreign exchange markets. Now, why would they need to do that? Deflation. What is deflation? So deflation means that the dollar was actually growing in terms. The dollar, which was backed by gold, was growing in terms of purchasing power. This is what happens with a sound money. This is how Bitcoin operates. If you had a Bitcoin 3 years ago versus Bitcoin today, you could buy a lot more with that Bitcoin, can't you? Because it's a deflationary asset. Well, during the time of Roosevelt, the government adopted this policy that it needed to end the Depression rather than by enabling private corporations and the economy itself, the market, through free market, by freeing up the free market, right? They decided to expand the money supply, massive government spending, massive government growth and injection. And how could they do that? Well, at the time, We didn't have the Federal Reserve on a fiat monetary system, so they couldn't just print and create new money. So they had to take the gold. This is the only way to achieve that deflate. They needed to deflate and devalue the dollar to fund the government operations and also to fund the coming war. Understanding the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 was the culmination of an emergency executive measures and banking laws passed under Franklin Roosevelt in his first 100 days in office, which fell during the 1933 banking crisis. In March and April of 1933, Roosevelt declared a national bank holiday to stem a run on the banks and passed the Emergency Banking Act of 1933 that allowed the recapitalization of banks by the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, what is a run on the bank? Do you understand? Let's talk about runs on banks for just a second. What is the reason? Why is it such that there can be a run on the bank? It's this. The bank doesn't actually hold your deposits. We have a system, it's called fractional reserve banking. And so what happens is any given bank, depositor bank, will take those deposits and use it as collateral and lend it out. But here's where it gets crazy. If you dig deep, I recommend reading a book like The Web of Debt, or there's so many others out there to understand this more if you want to dig deeper. But what happens is, over time, what has happened is the law has changed such that the amount of money that a bank has to hold as collateral to back the loans that they give out has shrunk less and less and less. Lower percentage, 10%, 7%. And now I think we're pretty much at like nothing, no requirement. So if you deposit $100, the bank can loan out 100 times that and use your $100 as collateral for those loans. It's called fractional reserve banking. This is how the monetary supply, this is how the money supply expands, because they don't actually have to have the money to lend it out. Okay. And this is why there are running banks, because suddenly everybody at the same time says, oh no, there's this crisis. Oh shoot, I got to go withdraw my money for the bank. And they show up and they knock on the bank's doors, and guess what? The bank's closed because money isn't there. It reminds me of that classic scene in It's a Wonderful Life, the savings and loan. And all the people come and he's like, they're like, we want our money, George. We want our money. And he's like, no, you don't understand. We don't have your money. It's in Joe's house, and it's in Sally's house, and it's in Bob's house. I don't care. I want my money. So this is what was happening in 1933. So Roosevelt declared a national bank holiday to stem that run on the banks and passed the Emergency Banking Act of 1933 that allowed the recapitalization of banks by the Federal Reserve Bank. Congress also passed the Banking Act of 1933 in June, also known as the Glass-Steagall Act, which created deposit insurance and other policies to stabilize banking. So they took the gold so that they could devalue the dollar, so they could increase the money supply, so that they could recapitalize the banks, so that they could get that money out into the economy. On April 5th, 1933, Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin. Isn't that great? Don't you love that? It's amazing, the usage of words. Instead of calling it saving, which is what you do when you store up money, right? Or gold, which was money. And we're going to call it hoarding. The hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. Executive Order 6102 forbid the hoarding of gold coin. The order required individuals, businesses, and banks to deliver their gold and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve in exchange for, here we go. Remember that question of, what is it? Someone's going to object and say, no, they didn't steal the gold because they gave the fair market value. No, they didn't. It was by executive order that they required everyone to deliver their gold to the Federal Reserve for $20.67. $20.67 an ounce. This made the trade and possession of gold of more than $100 a criminal offense. Crypto people. If you look at what happened in our history, you will see that it is possible that they could make the trade and possession of Bitcoin or of crypto a criminal offense. They did it with gold. Now, will they do it? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Ultimately, I don't think so, but it is possible, and that's what Dalio is getting at here. It's a possibility. This, in effect, suspended the gold standard that the U.S. followed since the 1800s. From 1800 to 1933, over 100 years, the currency of the United States was sound, was backed by gold, and this was arguably, as is argued by many Austrian economists, others, the most prosperous period of time the planet has ever seen. If you were to go time travel back to 1800 and see the way that people lived then, fast forward to 1933, the change was radical. The radical change and the improvement in the quality of life that people were enjoying by 1933. And the rise of the middle class and the distribution of wealth within the United States, just from the founding of the United States, from the 1800s up to 1933, entering into the Great Depression, of course. But prior to that, phenomenal growth in terms of real wealth with a sound currency. The subsequent passing of the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 completed this suspension and the transfer of gold from private hands to the U.S. Treasury. As mentioned above, the law required that the Federal Reserve, private individuals, and business entities remit any gold in their possession over the value of $100 to the government. Gold was functionally converted from a currency to a commodity, which you couldn't own. Even gold coins at the Treasury were ordered to be melted down and converted to gold bars. The act also fixed the weight of the dollar at 15.715 grains of 9/10 fine gold. It changed the nominal price of gold. And here's where we get to some of the meat of that issue of, did they steal the gold? It changed the nominal price of gold. So they took the gold, they gave it a nominal value of $20.67 per troy ounce, and then immediately they changed the nominal price to $35. By doing this, the Treasury saw the value of their gold holdings increase by $2.81 billion. Boom! Increase in the money supply. But even more egregious is the fact that gold went up to $50 an ounce almost immediately on the global market. This is an important fact. Investopedia points out the price of gold was fixed until 1971, which was really totally irrelevant because no one could buy it. When then President Richard Nixon created a fiat currency system by ending the convertibility of US dollars into gold. So up till 1971, from 1933 to 1971, the US dollar was still convertible into gold, but only for foreign entities, not for US citizens. So you couldn't take your money and go down to the bank and get some gold for $35. That wasn't the actual value of the gold anyway. But it was illegal to do that. So the whole system was just rigged and just, Though the act didn't technically take the U.S. off the gold standard, it did, the act in 1933, it did give the government more control over the domestic money supply. It also allowed the Treasury to buy gold internationally to further devalue the dollar in foreign exchange markets. And that's what this is all about. The current monetary system, as it works now, with the dollar being the reserve currency of the world and it being completely, totally 100% fiat and controlled by the Federal Reserve, gives the Federal Reserve, gives the Treasury, and when they work together, right, which they're doing increasingly. Now we see even the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen, is now the head of the Treasury, right? I think there's some collusion or ties going on there, you think? It's all central. That in and of itself makes the system more centralized, looks more communistic. But it gives them the ability and the power to not just control the U.S. economy through different mechanisms, but foreign exchange markets around the world. And it gives the U.S. incredible economic advantage when it comes to importing and exporting and all those different types of factors, wielding influence, etc. And we might get more into that at some point, sometime down the road. But this is why a lot of this has been done. But see, the thing of it is that the U.S. has reneged on its agreement that it made, its international agreements that it's made to all the other countries of the world. Because when everyone agreed to adopt the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency of the world, they agreed that it would be exchangeable for gold, that it would be backed, that it would be limited in supply. Gold limits the supply. They didn't agree to the idea that the United States could just inflate and print and create all, new money. Nobody around the world really wants to hold gold, U.S. treasuries anymore, because treasury notes, because after the 2008, 2009 crisis, they saw the amount of money that was created for stimulus and bailouts and on, et cetera. Why would they want to play this game? Why would China, Russia, you name it, want to play this game where we've reneged on the initial agreement and now just wield this massive influence because we can do anything we want in terms of just printing. We can just, we have debt to China, so we can demonetize that debt by just devaluing the dollar by massively creating new amount of, just print it all up. Okay, so we got whatever the number is, $9 trillion of debt to, I'm just throwing something out there. I don't know if it's what it is anymore. I haven't looked recently. I know it's way less than it used to be. Just print it up, pay them off. Why would they want that? Essentially that's kind of what is happening with the increasing of the money supply to devalue the dollar in the foreign exchange markets. Roosevelt and the Congress actions then in 1933 were not entirely popular, though, and several cases were brought before the U.S. Supreme Court in 1935 to test the constitutionality of the government's requisitioning of domestic gold. But these cases rested on the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, which forbids private property to be taken for public use without just compensation. In the first two cases, the questions before the court were whether the federal government had the power to regulate contracts with gold clauses. In a 5-4 ruling, the court said the government has plenary power over the money supply, and therefore it also had the power to abrogate gold clauses in contracts. So they never really addressed the issue of whether it was constitutionally legal to just take everyone's gold. Essentially what they said, and because the Fifth Amendment says that it forbids private property to be taken for public use without just compensation. So unfortunately, there is that amendment which does seem to indicate, and that's what was used, but they never really addressed that directly so much as what they addressed was whether the federal government had the power to regulate contracts with gold clauses. In a 5-4 ruling, the court said the government has plenary power over the money supply, and therefore it also had the power to abrogate gold clauses in the contracts. So basically, this means that the government has unrestricted, unrestrained, absolute, and total plenary power over the money supply to do anything they want. So you think you live in a free country? Now they're saying they're using this idea that they have power over the money supply to justify taking any private property, so long as they give just compensation. So they can create the US dollar, which is essentially now a shit coin, but backed by nothing, fiat. They can declare to have whatever value they wanted to have, and they can take whatever property viewers they want to take. Let's put it in crypto terms. It's like the Treasury comes along and says, "Hey, look, we're declaring that Dogecoin is the only legal cryptocurrency, and each Doge is worth $1 instead of 5 cents or whatever it is today. And everybody has to turn in all their other crypto in exchange for Doge, and we're gonna take over the network, and we're gonna take over the code, and we're gonna increase the supply in order to do that." That's how it works. That's what's happening when they assign a value to the dollar as they did, and say, well, it's worth $27. No, now it's worth $20.67. No, now it's worth $50. Now it's worth $35. If you want to learn more about these types of things, I highly recommend Mises Institute. You can find their content at Mises.org. There's a bunch of really great podcasts, books that have written. This article here is by Thomas Woods, who has a podcast, which I highly recommend. I'll put a link to it. He talks about the Great Gold Robbery of 1933, saying it's been 75 years since the federal government, on the spurious grounds of fighting the Great Depression, ordered the confiscation of all monetary gold from Americans, permitting trivial amounts for ornamental or industrial use. This happens to be one of the episodes Kevin Gutzman and I describe in detail in their new book, Who Killed the Constitution? I want to check that out. Who Killed the Constitution? The Fate of American Liberty from World War I to George W. Bush. Interestingly, he notes from the point of view of the typical American classroom, on the other hand, the incident may as well not have occurred. And that's why most Americans have no idea that this type of thing ever happened in the United States, but it did. A key piece of legislation in this story is the Emergency Banking Act of 1933, which Congress passed on March 9th without having read it, and after only the most trivial debate. Does that sound familiar? Sounds like what happens these days, doesn't it? Oh, we got this crisis. We got this emergency. We don't need to read what we're passing. Let's just pass this thing. House Minority Leader Bertrand H. Snell, Republican of New York, generously conceded that it was entirely out of the ordinary to pass legislation that is not even in print at the time it is offered. He urged his colleagues to pass it all the same. The house is burning down, he said, and the President of the United States says this is the way to put out the fire. Applause. Yeah, the house is burning down. We've got a crisis. We've got an emergency. And to me, at this time, there's only one answer to the question, he said, and that is to give the president what he demands and says is necessary to meet the situation. Among other things, the act retroactively approved the president's closing of private banks throughout the country for several days the previous week, an act for which he had not bothered to provide a legal justification. It gave the Secretary of the Treasury the power to require all individuals and corporations to hand over all their gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates if, in his judgment, quote, such action is necessary to protect the currency system of the United States. The Emergency Banking Act reached back in time to amend the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, which had originally been intended to criminalize economic intercourse between American citizens and declared enemies of the United States. One provision of the act granted the president the power to regulate and even prohibit, quote, under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe, any transactions in foreign exchange, export, or earmarkings of gold or silver coin or bullion or currency by any person within the United States. In 1918, the act was amended to extend its provisions 2 years beyond the conclusion of hostilities and to allow the president to investigate, regulate, or prohibit even the hoarding of gold by an American. See, this is what happens. This is what always happens. I talked about it earlier. Done under duress, done under crisis, never lifted, never removed, enacted, never removed. And it happened here again. After those 2 years elapsed, people generally assumed that the Trading with the Enemy Act had passed into desuetude, but the Supreme Court later explained that the Act's provisions were not limited merely to World War I and the 2 years that followed. It, quote, stood ready to meet additional wars and additional enemies and could be called into service once again under those circumstances. Little did anyone suspect in 1917 that these, quote, additional enemies would turn out to be the American people themselves. As amended by the Emergency Banking Act of 1933, the Trading with the Enemy Act no longer said that simply during a time of war could the president prohibit the export of gold or take action against hoarding, which is, holding on to one's money, saving. Now these actions could be taken during time of war or during any other period of national emergency declared by the president. So see, even to this day, the legal foundation is there. You try to protect yourself against inflation. You try to protect yourself against the malinvestment and mismanagement of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, et cetera, by sacking gold, stacking silver. They can take it. They can take it at any time. And that's one of the unique differences between crypto and gold and silver. Because gold is physical and can be found. They can knock on your door. They can go to the company where the vault is held, where you store it. Now with Bitcoin, can they find out that you have it? Likely, yes. Can they confiscate it? Not if you're willing to die. I mean, obviously they can put a gun to your head and say, show us, tell us the private key. But it's much more difficult to do that. And that is one of the reasons why they may not try to pull the same type of action against crypto that they did against gold. Moving on, a month later, claiming authority from the Emergency Banking Act and its amendment to the Trading with the Enemy Act, the president ordered all individuals and corporations in America to hand over their gold holdings to the federal government in exchange for an equivalent amount of paper currency. The paper currency they were receiving in exchange for the gold had always been redeemable in gold in the past. So few saw anything amiss in this coerced transaction, and most trusted the government's assurances that this was somehow necessary in order to combat the Depression. So they thought that they were going to get their gold back. They thought that this was just an emergency action. They thought that they were just helping, Roosevelt out to deal with this crisis, this monetary crisis. Only later would they discover that they weren't getting the gold back and that the paper dollars they were being given in exchange would be devalued. Soon, only foreign governments and central banks would be able to convert dollars into gold, and even that link to gold would be severed in 1971. On June 5th, 1933, at the behest of the president, Congress took the next step, passing a joint resolution making it illegal to require payment in gold or a particular kind of coin or currency or in an amount in money of the United States measured thereby. Any provision in a private or a public contract promising payment in gold was thereby nullified. Payment could be made in whatever the government declared to be legal tender, and gold could not be used even as a yardstick for determining how much paper money would be owed. For the next 6 months, President Roosevelt pursued an erratic monetary course. Every day, a new gold price was declared on a basis no one could figure out. Private lending, in effect, came to a halt, with the value of the dollar in constant flux amid the prospect of ongoing devaluation. As Senator Carter Glass, a Democrat from Virginia, put it, no man outside of a lunatic asylum will loan his money today on a farm mortgage. And thus the government could triumphantly announce that since the private sector was cruelly depriving Americans of credit, it could step in and provide relief. Meanwhile, Senator William Borah was assuring his countrymen that when it came to the nation's monetary system, there is no limitation upon the power of Congress. It is not circumscribed in any respect whatever. It is given full and plenary power to deal with that subject, and therefore, it is the same as if there were no constitution whatsoever. Borah also tried to argue that, quote, when an individual takes an obligation payable in gold, he does so with the full understanding that the government may change its monetary policy at any time and that he must accept whatever the Congress says at a particular time shall constitute money. Woods points out the court never pronounced upon the constitutionality of the gold seizure for reasons we speculate in our book, the legality of which it simply took for granted. So the Supreme Court just simply took for granted that the gold seizure was constitutional. Ignore the issue, essentially. The cases it chose to hear involved the cancellation of gold clauses in public and private contracts. We've talked about that. There actually was a case, Perry versus the United States, which involved a man who had purchased in gold a U.S. bond that was payable in gold, and he was seeking payment either in gold or in the equivalent in paper currency. Since the government intended to pay in depreciated dollars, he believed he was receiving far less than he was entitled to under the terms of the bond. The bond's face value was $10,000 in gold. In the inflated dollars of post-gold standard America, it would have taken nearly $17,000 in paper dollars in order to satisfy what the government had contracted to pay him. So here's what happened. The court declared that the plaintiff was indeed entitled to his gold, since the government had no obligation, since the government does have an obligation to live up to its promises. But in not paying him his gold, the government wasn't really wronging him, since the gold was now legal to hold. So in other words, if the government paid him in gold, it would then have to confiscate that gold from him anyway, since holding gold was against the law. How convoluted and messed up is that? By the 1970s, the federal government had once again permitted Americans to hold gold coins, so we can own gold now. But when it came time to actually mint them again, it made sure that the gold coins could never circulate and displace the constantly depreciating paper currency printed by the U.S. government. The law required that such coins could circulate with a face value only a tiny fraction of their market value. So, yeah, you can get gold bullion from the Treasury. 1 ounce, we'll say $1 US on it, and you'd be insane to try to use it as currency and purchase something at, when it actually has a value over $1,700 currently. The full story of the gold confiscation is actually much worse than this, and we tell it in Who Killed the Constitution. So all of this today, I just wanted to bring to your attention to show what could happen, how the U.S. government stole its people's gold, devalued the dollar, and how they could do the same with crypto. And this is what Dalio is alluding to. Is it going to happen? I think it would be much more difficult and is not very likely. And the reasons are at the time that this was done, people trusted the government. Franklin D. Roosevelt had popularity like that, that if it's accurate, what has been written was beyond anything any president has enjoyed of late. It's for those reasons that he was able to stack the cord and serve 3 terms, do all kinds of other things. Today, people are not trusting of the government. Today, the reaction, I just don't know that it's politically viable. And as time goes on, as more and more adoption occurs in crypto and with Bitcoin and with these institutions, just like we were reading today with Fidelity and Goldman Sachs, and the list goes on and on and on, it becomes less and less likely that there's going to be an outright ban on Bitcoin. But who knows? Who knows? In a time of crisis, and we've seen this with the pandemic, regardless of how you feel about masks or this or that, what we've seen is in a crisis, people are still willing to go to great lengths to accommodate or try to do what they're told to do, what is purportedly in the best interest. Some places just went nuts with ridiculous rules of what you could and couldn't do, like at lower levels of government, and people complied. And so, you look at that, and again, I'm not arguing for right, wrong, or whatever. I mean, I'm a libertarian. I lean to the libertarian side of things and believe that it's important to protect our liberties. That's more important because when you remove those, the ramifications, the death that occurs, the loss, just the death that occurs simply from the loss of productivity over time is greater than. But anyway, ultimately, my conclusion would be, I don't think it's going to happen, but it could. And so that always has to be kept in the back of our minds. And we have to make plans contingent upon that potential inevitability, or potentiality, I should say. Okay, friends, I think I'm going to wrap it up for the day. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you all. Remember, it's always a great day to earn and stack more crypto. Look to seeing you tomorrow. Come back. Let's talk about crypto once again. I hope you have a phenomenal day on this Friday. Going into the weekend. Yes. Enjoy. Talk to you soon. Bye now.